I just want to acknowledge the owners of the land on which all of us come from, their elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge the wisdom keepers, the keepers of light, who've been bringing these medicines through the ages to us so that we can heal and expand our consciousness and work with these medicines in new and different ways. And now I'm just going to give just a couple of short slides of introduction on Mind Medicine Australia. I just might put a gallery view on for a moment, and if we could just have a show of hands if this is your very first webinar with Mind Medicine Australia. Oh, quite a lot of you. Nearly all of you. Wow. So what we might actually do is just show you just a very short video that summarises what we're doing and why. And Ilan, would you be able to put that on for us?
Did you know that over 45% of Australians will experience mental illness in their lifetime? That's nearly half of us.
I can't sleep. Everything feels flat and grey. I feel ashamed.
Mental ill health devastates lives and families and costs Australians around $60 billion a year. Research and treatment expenses continue to rise, yet rates of mental illness indicate that we're losing the battle. New approaches are urgently needed to address this immense suffering and cost. Psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is currently being trialled worldwide and has demonstrated remarkable promise in treating depression, anxiety, addiction, and post-traumatic stress disorder, with new trials underway for treatment of dementia and anorexia. The treatment combines a short program of psychotherapy with just a few medicinal doses of psilocybin or MDMA. In the 1950s and 60s, psychedelic treatments had a major impact in psychiatry, and many considered it the next big thing in mental health treatment. But for political reasons, the Nixon administration criminalised the use of psychedelics and effectively stopped all research. That research has finally begun again. With proper clinical support, psychedelic treatments are safe and frequently lead to remission after only a short program, and even where current treatments have failed. Here at Mind Medicine Australia, we believe everyone should have access to the best treatments for mental illness. Subject to forthcoming clinical trial results, we will seek to establish best practice in regulated psychedelic-assisted treatment. Mind Medicine Australia is wholly focused on the clinical application of psychedelic medicines. We're preparing for change by developing therapist training, ethical guidelines, a centre of excellence in psychedelic medicine, educational material and events, and supporting clinical research. We're a small organisation doing big things, and we need your support. Please share this video and visit our website to support us and get involved.
Well, and if you enjoyed that animated video, please do feel free to share it. Ilan will post the link in the chat screen. So we're now just going to give just a few slides of introduction to Mind Medicine Australia for those of you that are new on the call, and then I'll introduce Dr. Rickcord. So this webinar is called Endocannabinoid Medicine, a Gateway to Psychedelic-Assisted Psychotherapy. And welcome, Jamie, and thank you for joining us today. Jamie is a doctor who's based in Byron Bay, and we'll talk more about that shortly. So just a reminder that we don't encourage or facilitate illegal use of psychedelics or plant medicines. Our focus is wholly clinical. We do record all our webinars, and they're available on our YouTube channel, and we also share them on social media platforms. So if some of your friends have registered for tonight and couldn't turn up for some reason, the webinar will be available on our YouTube platform. Next slide. Oh, we've done that one, thank you. So we have a mental health crisis that is significant, of epidemic proportions and getting worse. Before COVID, 1 in 5 Australian adults had a chronic mental illness, and 1 in 8 Australians were on antidepressants, including 1 in 4 older Australians, and children as young as 5 being prescribed with psychiatric medicines. It's anticipated that 1 in 2 of us will experience mental illness in our lifetimes. Now, of course, during COVID, we've seen a massive acceleration of these figures, and there was some recent research done which suggested that 4 out of 5 Australians said their mental health had deteriorated during the crisis. Next slide. Unfortunately, though, in spite of the enormous need in the community, the treatment outcomes remain inadequate. So there's been no improvement in treatment outcomes over the past 50 years. In the case of depression, only about 30 to 35% of sufferers experience remission from pharmacotherapy or psychotherapy or a combination of the two. Many relapse after treatment stops, and there's common side effects, which many of us know about. And the medicines are also very difficult to withdraw from. In the case of PTSD, this is even harder to treat and remission rates are even lower. So a more of the same approach is not going to solve the problem, which is why Mind Medicine Australia was formed. Next slide. So our charity, which was founded by myself and Peter Hunt, my husband, exists to alleviate the suffering caused by mental illness in Australia through expanding the treatment options available to medical practitioners and their patients. Our goal is to establish safe and effective psychedelic-assisted treatments to cure a range of mental illnesses. At the moment, our focus is on psilocybin and MDMA, but we are also interested in other psychedelics and the research that's coming out about those. For us, success would be that these therapies become an integrated part of the mental health system, so that if you go to your medical practitioner and you have some type of mental illness or suffering, that the doctor will talk to you about this as one of the first line of treatments that's available to you, with full disclosure on risks and benefits of all treatments suggested. These treatments would continue to have high remission rates and lead to substantial improvement in our mental health statistics. And these treatments would be accessible and affordable to all Australians in need. And each and every one of you on this webinar can help us in achieving this mission, and we'll talk further about that. Next slide, thank you. So at the moment, the 2 medicines that are most advanced globally are medicinal psilocybin for the treatment of depression and potentially obsessive compulsive disorder and addiction, and medicinal MDMA for PTSD and potentially addiction. The remarkable thing about these medicines is they only require 2 to 3 dose sessions, in contrast to conventional treatments, which for many people, a mental health diagnosis, mental illness diagnosis can be like a life sentence, requiring someone to take daily medications for the rest of their lives and or undertake weekly psychotherapy for a long period of time, if not for the rest of their lives. These medicines are in fact curative. They're not palliative. They're not just managing the condition. And that's what makes them so remarkable. And the medicines are considered very safe in medically controlled environments, and they're non-addictive. Both have been granted breakthrough therapy designation by the FDA in the US to fast track the approval process. And this is only granted to medicines that are considered significantly superior to other medicines. Next slide, thank you. Peter Andrews, just call me. So in addition to that, one of the remarkable things about medicinal psilocybin in particular is the way that it alters communication between brain networks, including the default mode network, which is associated with many mental illnesses. And I love this diagram on the right, which is a representation of an fMRI scan on patients. So the circle on the right is the placebo. So someone who is suffering with depression but hasn't had the psilocybin treatment. And you can see the lack of connectivity in that person's brain. The neural networks are not really talking to each other. And the person is fairly stuck in rigid thought loops. You know, I'm not good enough, things won't work out for me, no one loves me, etc. Whereas on the left, you see the intervention with the psilocybin, this massive neurogenesis of neural networks, reconnection of old neural networks, creation of new neural networks leading to increased neural plasticity, and this sense of oneness and connection, which allows the patient to break out of their repetitive and rigid styles of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And this is what creates an active form of coping for the patient so that they become empowered for their own healing process. Of course, it's very important to say that a psilocybin dose on its own will not achieve this. It's incredibly important that all patients undergo integration sessions so that the experience they have with the medicines, which is often classified as one of the top 5 most meaningful experiences in their life, can actually become worthwhile in practice so that it will help them to make changes in their life, their work, their family situation, or whatever needs to change to help them to feel happier and more productive and lead a meaningful and contributing life. Next slide, thank you. So our focus is on 4 key strategies, and our goal at Mind Medicine Australia is to build the ecosystem to enable these medicines to be made available. The first of those is awareness and knowledge building. So events like tonight, educational events, webinars, so a free webinar series, which we're very proud of some of the webinars we had last year and the ones planned for this year. A major global summit planned for November 2021 with some of the leading researchers and scientists in the world, and our state and regional chapters. So we have over 25 chapters in Australia and 4 chapters in New Zealand, where people within communities can come together and work with us to educate and build awareness in their own communities, help raise funds, help manage events in their communities so that people get up the curve, talk to their local MPs and so on. In addition, we've just recently launched the first certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies in the Southern Hemisphere. And this program, the first cohort of this program, commences on January the 30th, which is extremely exciting. So we have a full cohort, 50 students. Dr Jamie Rickord's actually one of them. And our second intake commences in July. They're 4-month part-time courses to run alongside practitioners' professional practice. We have some wonderful, wonderful teachers in the course, including people like Dr Gabor Mate, Rick Doblin, Professor David Nutt, and many others. In addition, we're looking at the development of an Asia-Pacific Centre for Emerging Mental Health Therapies, for applied research and development, for development of agribusiness and manufacturing of the medicines in Australia, and looking at ways to educate and roll out these medicines so that they continue to be available and accessible to as many Australians as possible. And finally, our focus is on developing preferred legal and ethical frameworks. So many of you will know we've recently submitted rescheduling applications for psilocybin and MDMA, and we expect an interim decision on February the 3rd. We also have a psychological support service, which we'll talk further about after Jamie's talk, which offers support to those of you who may be using these medicines. Not that we advocate for you to use them outside medically controlled environments, but we do acknowledge that people do use these medicines, and you may need some integration support through our psychological support service, or you might need access to CBD or THC or other medicines, and we can provide referrals and support to you. In addition, we're also looking at developing protocols with a number of clinics around Australia to ensure that the treatments are done in the most effective way possible and the safest way possible. And yeah, we have lots of things going on. We also actually have a book of Australia's first book of psychedelic healing stories, which we just launched a couple of months ago. And we're looking for submissions to that book of your own healing stories, where these medicines have played a part in your healing up to date today. Next slide, thank you, Alana. And finally, before I introduce Dr. Jamie, I just want to say, yes, our webinars are free, but we really encourage you to make a donation and support our mission of making these therapies available through the medical system. Peter and I are philanthropists, and we encourage everyone to be as philanthropic as possible, because this is a big mission, and we can really only achieve this if we do this as a collective, as a collective movement. So we encourage you to share all of our upcoming events with your networks. I'm going to announce a couple of really exciting webinars after Jamie speaks. But now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Jamie Rickcord. Dr. Jamie is on the Mind Medicine Advisory Panel. He's a wonderful general practitioner, but he's also one of the leading cannabis practitioners in Australia, and runs the first cannabis clinic, correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, in Australia. Sorry, in Byron Bay, not in Australia, in Byron Bay. And we've had a lot to do with him, and I think you'll learn a lot from him. So without further ado, Jamie, I'll invite you to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. I always enjoy watching the introduction, and watching it tonight actually really brought home a few things, concepts that I'm going to introduce in my talk, or reiterate, I suppose, around the current paradigm and the treatments that are currently in existence, and how they're not really doing their job, and really how we need a different way of thinking. And I think endocannabinoid medicine is a way to start approaching new ways of thinking and breaking stigma. I'm just going to share. Has that come up as shared? Yeah, great. So it's one of those titles. I started doing backflips in my head when I put this down, because endocannabinoid medicine, a gateway to psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. It's a fairly controversial title, especially given that the current view in our society is that cannabis is it's changing, but cannabis is bad and it leads to other drugs. And that's not really true, is it? Trauma is what leads to drug abuse, as opposed to drugs. And we're talking about medicines, and I'm going to talk about cannabis as a medicine, and how I think it's a gateway, because of how we need to change our thinking and what's causing mental illness and how we approach it differently, but also because I think that cannabinoids are going to be very important preparing people for the assisted psychotherapy process. So that's really where this slide is going. It's a sort of bit of civil disobedience, although I'm not actually breaking the law, so it's a fairly weak civil disobedience. It's a new way of thinking. I'm going to talk about the endocannabinoid system and its role in mental health, its potential for preparing people, and why we're also excited about cannabinoids and tryptamines. It is a different way of thinking, and I've really crafted my kind of skills around cannabinoids and working with people and working with their health problems. And I'm more and more thinking about how we're going to be able to potentially use psychedelics in medicine, and they're really quite similar, because these medicines teach us a lot about human suffering and what's causing it, and nature does contain the answers. And cannabinoids and tryptamines are the keys to our consciousness, really. And through the use of them, the human body, which I think is a really important point, many people are talking about the plant, cannabinoids or psychedelic plants, but it's actually about the human body and what these medicines bring in, which is homeostasis, regulation, balance, and being in the present moment. And these are really the keys to living healthily as a liberated human. We will explain more. I will explain more. This is a concept that I think is really important, both for cannabinoids and psychedelics, and it goes along with this talk, which is really, I didn't call it a lese majeste. Carl Jung talked about lèse-majesté, talking ill of the king, speaking badly about the monarchy or the current paradigm. And a lot of the information and the how we all want to work is speaking ill of the king. The current system is not necessarily doing very well. And up until very recently, we couldn't even talk about these things. But Carl Jung talks about understanding the fellow human being, or understanding ourselves, and how we need to leave theoretical assumption behind us. So getting people well is understanding the individual, not the statistic. And modern medicine is very much evidence-based, and our patients are often a statistic, and there's not a lot of understanding of what's causing their illness. And to understand how cannabinoids work and understand how psychedelics work requires this lèse-majesté, because it goes against the current theories of mental health, especially. And one of the most important things that I've learned through treating the endocannabinoid system or using cannabinoid medicines is that every single person is completely individual, much like every single psychedelic treatment process will be completely individual. And trying to apply anything to the process other than what is presented to us at that point will likely result in a failure of that process. But we still need to work with statistics. We need to prove that what we're doing is efficacious and working. So it requires a two-way thinking. And from there, this is another, it's a Chilean psychiatrist and psychotherapist called Claudio Naranjo, who is a very interesting fellow and has some beautiful concepts about health and well-being. And he defines health as being in the present moment. And the more in the present moment we are, the healthier we are. Cannabinoids are very good at engaging our parasympathetic nervous system and putting us into the present. And psychedelic medicine will drag you kicking and screaming into the present moment in order to process emotional wounds or unconscious thought processes that are keeping us out of the present moment. And that ties in with this lèse-majesté. It's a dangerous wisdom. Knowing what these medicines can do really does present a problem for some of the ways we're currently treating people. And I'm just going to read something from his book, which is really important, I think. And he says that the transpersonal realm, something that goes beyond our intellectual, affective, and instinctual subselves, and which spiritual traditions have variously called a deeper self, a deeper mind, a deeper reality or truth, being, not being, spirit, emptiness, Tao, or God. This ineffable or empty realm of holiness or supreme value has always been regarded as something obscured by our imperfections, and is something that may be revealed to one who transcends the root of sickness that is the patriarchal mind. Though I would need more time and space to fully develop my view of patriarchy as the root condition of individual and social pathologies, let me turn to my contention that psychedelics can heal the unacknowledged problem of morality. I emphatically restate that nothing compares with the effectiveness of psychedelics when it comes to the cure of human fallenness, what we call original sin, universal neurosis, or the patriarchal mind, which many of us would consider trauma, and how trauma is what's causing all the problems, and how these medicines can help us address it, both cannabinoids and psychedelics. This slide I put in because this different way of thinking, this lèse-majesté against the patriarchal mind, it's a different way of thinking and treating our suffering. And the image of the back pain is a really great way of highlighting what we're talking about, because if you think about someone who slips a disc, that disc goes out and the whole body recoils to protect it, and then the biomechanics go out. People stop walking properly. They stop being present, and that protection that the body uses to protect that disc is what keeps people in suffering, because the biomechanics that are off mean that disc keeps getting irritated. So the human body has these kind of ways of protecting us that actually continue the suffering. And that's a good analogy for what goes on in our mind when we're traumatized and have mental health problems. And the autonomic nervous system, the fear cascade, and the response to threat upregulates us, and we can get stuck in that sympathetic place. And that's where cannabinoids are especially effective at bringing us some relief from our suffering. And Tanya has already brought up this slide with the default mode network, but it's the same thing. We get stuck in patterns that our body uses to protect us, but that's what keeps us from actually seeing the bigger picture and getting out of it. So cannabinoids can help with this process. Psychedelics can really lift us out of these kind of processes that we're in that keep us stuck, and see things from a different perspective, and bring some regulation and homeostasis back to our kind of emotional world. And you know, I'm not going to talk about this tonight because there's a talk in a couple of weeks from Sergeant Steve about using THC, especially as a psychedelic, and improving the kind of connections in the mind. But that's not really what I'm here to talk about tonight. So here I'm talking about the ECS, the endocannabinoid system, and how it can drop us out of these processes that we humans get stuck in, that just keep us in a cycle of samsara, really. I mean, it's a kind of analogy for what Buddhists would say. Samsara is the repeated cycle of not getting out of it. And, you know, these limited ways that our minds can work is samsara, and psychedelics can open us up to a new perspective and, you know, mystical experience, nirvana, however brief. So the endocannabinoid system, I'm going to talk about some science now because it's fascinating. And this slide is really to highlight that anandamide is really important. In fact, it's the bit that we don't think about. THC, CBD, the cannabis plant, the medicines that are within it are extremely effective in humans because of how they change our endocannabinoid system. So they increase anandamide. Now, anandamide was discovered in the 90s. It's our primary endocannabinoid. It lives within us. Ananda for internal bliss from the Sanskrit. So anandamide is our internal bliss molecule. It regulates and creates homeostasis, and it really settles things down so that we feel better. And I think, you know, a lot of this talk is about the comparison between the two medicines and how we can, moving through cannabinoids into psychedelics, and really the focus needs to be more about the endocannabinoid system and what that looks like when it regulates and how that is helping our patients. Because talking about the plant a lot really can be a bit of a distraction and people freak out. And psychedelics are the same. Assisted psychotherapy is what's important. The keys to the lock to open our consciousness, to help us break out of these repetitive patterns. They're wonderful, amazing medicines, but the human body is what does the healing. The cannabinoids bring us into the parasympathetic so the body can do what it does best. Psychedelics open our consciousness so that we can see things that we were previously unaware of, feel emotions that we haven't felt and have been walled off. Our bodies want to heal. And that slide I showed you with the back pain is the analogy. It's the body that keeps us locked, but the body wants to get out of it. So these are the keys to unlock these doors so that things can really change. And that is a very different way of approaching patients to what we're doing at the moment. Now, the endocannabinoid system is made up of a number of different receptors, CB1 and CB2. Interestingly, the endocannabinoid system is ubiquitous to vertebrates on planet Earth. If you have a spinal cord, you have an endocannabinoid system. Now, this endocannabinoid system has got very little genetic variation amongst species, which means that ours and the receptors and the enzymes involved are very similar to a dog or a cat or a dolphin. Now that means that it's an ancient system and was probably perfected in the time of the dinosaurs. So nature really knew what she was doing when she gave vertebrates an endocannabinoid system. And at the same time, she gave us a plant that's full of compounds that can be used to manipulate those vertebrates' endocannabinoid system back into balance and regulation and homeostasis. It's found throughout the human body. It has a role in virtually every single function, most of which I'm not going to talk about tonight because I'm talking about mental health and depression, anxiety, PTSD. But these two molecules, there's a lot more, but we'll keep it simple. CBD, THC work for almost every single disease, assuming there's an endocannabinoid deficiency or dysregulation. When they don't work, it's because the endocannabinoid system's not the problem. But when they do, they can replace multiple different medications and bring people back to themselves, to their parasympathetic, rest, digest, heal. They can break pain pathways. They can break anxiety pathways. They can shift us out of that broken, hobbling along person that's not getting any better. It acts as a thermostat. So when things are too hot, it cools it down. And when it's too cold, it lifts it up. And it actually works from both sides. So in our brain, we have inhibitory and excitatory neurons. And anandamide's function is to modulate the firing of those synapses. They're retrograde neurotransmitters, which means they act differently to all the others. So they're released postsynaptically to have an action on the presynaptic neuron, and then that will regulate how that neuron's working. So if it's excitatory, it will dim it, and if it's inhibitory, it will prevent the inhibition. So the inhibitory neurons back off, and the excitatory neurons sort of settle down. So from both sides, things start to change. 2-AG is the other primary endocannabinoid in the human body. This slide is really, so now we're going to talk about the phytocannabinoids, the plant cannabinoids, THC and CBD. Now, CBD is a fascinating molecule because it doesn't really work directly, and everyone, there's a CBD health craze going on out there. Everyone's using CBD if it's CBD that they're using. But CBD actually isn't what it's about. It's about anandamide, and CBD doesn't work directly on the receptors. CBD prevents the breakdown of anandamide. So CBD is increasing what's already in our body so that it can have its effect. And THC mimics anandamide, is a good way to look at it, mimics it at the receptor. So one of these molecules is increasing the anandamide, increasing the tone of our endocannabinoid system, restores homeostasis, it promotes sleep, appetite, stress reduction, and modulation of pain. It regulates pleasure, memory, cognition, sensory processing, and brain development. That is essentially our parasympathetic nervous system. So CBD is increasing the tone of it, and THC is mimicking at the receptor and firing. So between the two, this system starts to work. An analogy I use a lot with my patients is that their endocannabinoid system is the engine in a car in the paddock, and it's not working, and it needs to be jump started to go. So we've got to push it out the paddock, and we've got to get it some momentum, and that's CBD. Whether that takes 2 people or 4 people or 5 people depends on the terrain. It depends on the individual. So we keep going in with CBD, and we start to push this system into working, and then THC is dropping the clutch to fire that engine. And when you get it going, the system starts to regulate, and people start to feel much more balanced. Their pain dissipates, their anxiety moves away. Now, we all know THC has psychoactive effects, and it does in large doses, but on the whole, we can achieve this balance without psychoactive effects of THC. Sometimes that has a benefit for sleep, for pain, and perhaps one day even recreationally, but not at the moment. But we don't need to be stoned for this system to work. That's the most fascinating part. I saw one of my patients yesterday morning getting a coffee, and he's using his CBD, and he just said it's so interesting because he was expecting something. He was expecting something to come, and it didn't. He had an absence, and it was the absence of anxiety and the absence of stress. So he felt nothing other than his symptoms dissipating and feeling regulated, which I thought was a really beautiful way of putting it, because we all assume give someone plant, they get stoned. It's utter rubbish if the right doses are used. This slide is just shows CBD working on all these different receptors. So it blocks anandamide, and interestingly, it actually works at the 5-HT1A receptor, That's the receptor that antidepressants have their action at, and that's also why CBD is anxiolytic. It reduces anxiety, and it works on a whole bunch of different other receptors and ion channels. All of the function of that is to improve the tone of the endocannabinoid system. This slide is really just showing how complicated it is, all these different enzymes, the processes made to kind of make these endocannabinoids and to discharge these endocannabinoids. And you'll hear people say frequently that these medicines are not, this endocannabinoid system is not taught in medical school, which it's not. And I think there's a massive misunderstanding out there about what it's about. It's about regulation, balance, homeostasis. That's what these medicines do, and it allows people to heal. It allows the body to heal, and it's fascinating that it's been completely missed because it's been illegal, but we need to change that quite rapidly. This slide, CB1 receptors are throughout our brain. They're really what's the receptor that's involved in treatment of mental health. So the kind of anxiety related responses occur through CB1. So CBD is anxiolytic in humans. It reduces fear memory expression and produces an enduring reduction in learned fear expression in conjunction with therapy. A direct analogy to what we want to do with psilocybin and MDMA. It works through the serotonin system directly and indirectly by boosting the endocannabinoid system. We can treat PTSD, we can treat the symptoms of PTSD with plant phytocannabinoids and reduce the stress response, reduce people down the fear cascade, move them up through the hierarchy of engagement and help to regulate their system. And then potentially, my theory is that we can do that, prepare them for the assisted psychotherapy, and then go in with MDMA in the case of PTSD and cure their PTSD. I wouldn't say cannabinoids are curative. I would say they will help the cure rates of MDMA when the time comes. Now, the endocannabinoid system is the gatekeeper as well to our hypothalamic pituitary axis. So our stress response, our cortisol and our adrenal glands. And the ECS pushes that system towards inhibition. So it settles it all down and reduces people's stress response. And if we think that PTSD, anxiety, certain types of depression are due to adrenal fatigue, ongoing hyperactivation and stress, it makes total sense that we need to use the endocannabinoid system to treat some of the symptoms associated with activation of the hypothalamic pituitary axis. Chronic stress decreases the ECS's ability to regulate the axis. ECS dysregulation and stress may lead to hypothalamic pituitary hyperactivity and the development of depression. And in depression, the noradrenergic system fails to mobilize to this hypothalamic activation adaptively. So the system fails to be brought back into balance. And that then manifests itself as depression. So in certain forms of depression, regulating the endocannabinoid system, giving it the tone and settling down these stress responses will bring our patients a lot of relief. The CB1 receptors, we all know about trauma responses, we understand that enlarged amygdalas, people living in their sort of reptilian brain and unable to access their prefrontal cortex, they're parasympathetic, present and connected. CB1 receptors are located throughout the emotional brain. And in anxiety and depression, there's a decrease in the number of CB1 receptors and there's a decrease in the amount of anandamide in the brain. So again, this system is going to be really important when we're looking for new ways to treat mental health problems, which is what all of this is about. And it is really very, very funny that all of these drugs are currently viewed as the scourge of society, when actually it's the complete opposite. These medicines are going to be what really makes a difference for people. So the endocannabinoid system, balance, regulation, homeostasis, back in the present moment. Now, the next section is probably a little bit confronting. So I think it's great, but it's some interesting stuff in here. How can we use the endocannabinoid system to prepare people for augmented psychotherapy? Well, it's going to be essential. There are a few caveats to that. We don't necessarily know how CBD will interact with these medicines in the brain. They're working on different receptors. CBD is the 5-HTP1A, whereas the psychedelics are working on the 2A. So yeah, no one's looked at it. There is no research looking at CBD and its effect on these medicines in psychotherapy. There is a lot of research coming out around how SSRIs are affecting and these therapies. A recent paper was published last year, and they proved that SSRIs blunt the response to MDMA. So the group that were using SSRIs and tapered had a dramatically reduced effect to those who were not having tapering. This slide's great. 75% of participants who did not taper medications no longer met PTSD criteria after MDMA. So if they weren't on SSRIs, 75% of them got better, finished. Those that did taper off SSRIs, 36% of them got better. So the SSRIs blocked the effect of MDMA. It didn't work as well in that group. So therefore, our patients need to be off SSRIs for as long as possible before they enter an assisted psychotherapy process. How are we going to keep them regulated and balanced and hopefully well whilst that happens? I've already answered that question. Now, this slide is really interesting. The evidence for SSRIs. I get told every day there's not enough evidence for cannabinoid medicine, which is not true. There's lots of evidence for cannabinoid medicine. What this slide is about is evidence for SSRIs. The NICE study in 2009, NICE from the UK, pretty influential bunch. Antidepressants have no benefit over placebo in mild depression. The STAR-D trial, 4,000 participants, SSRIs lead to remission in 4% of people. And this study, 2018, a meta-analysis, 21 antidepressants, 522 trials. Antidepressants were more effective than placebo in severe depression only. So there's an enormous amount of evidence that says that SSRIs are not working, but we're prescribing them liberally still. Now, we know that the one thing that does work for PTSD is MDMA. So not only do SSRIs not work for depression, they block the only thing that does work for depression from working. What I found equally fascinating was that in the DSM-5, there is an SSRI withdrawal syndrome. It's a recognized psychiatric diagnosis. So we give people SSRIs, they don't work, and then we withdraw them and we give them a psychiatric illness. It's recognized. What's even more fascinating is that the diagnosis of complex PTSD is not even in the DSM-5 yet. Now, I think everyone needs to think about that. There's a recognized psychiatric disorder withdrawing treatments that don't work. And the problem being complex PTSD, which is what we all want to treat, isn't a recognized psychiatric diagnosis. And I think that's a really interesting and fairly pertinent fact. This next slide is just back to SSRIs, how we get some lifting of depression and an improvement in well-being, and they're working on a very specific part of the brain, whereas the psychedelics through the 5-HT2A receptor are increasing emotional sensitivity, emotional release, and that is what's getting people better. So they're working in different ways, but it's all to do with serotonin being a tryptamine as well, DMT, psilocybin, these are all tryptamines. MDMA is not. LSD is a semi-synthetic tryptamine. So we're on the right tracks with SSRIs, but it's not working. And nature's given us the molecules we need. I looked at a few other studies thinking that we need to be using cannabinoids to treat people before assisted psychotherapy. And basically there was some studies done, some information collated. It wasn't a very rigid study, but this was done in the 90s, and administration of medically prescribed SSRIs substantially attenuated the subjective effects of self-administered LSD. So it blocked the effect of LSD. The fiducia, the study I was just talking about, MDMA increases synaptic concentrations of serotonin, but with an SSRI it attenuates, as we talked about. And the Imperial group, there's actually not so much data around SSRIs prior to psilocybin. I hope some similar studies are reported soon, but it's already been reported that SSRIs obstruct the therapeutic potential of psilocybin. And they downregulate the 5-HT2A receptor, and that's the receptor we're interested in when we're using psychedelic medicines to treat these mental health problems. These people are sick though, so they are going to need some form of medication before they have these treatments, and the answer is obvious. Now, ceasing these first-line medications, I've just taken some, what I could find. MAPS for the PTSD, they taper and discontinue. They want at least 5 half-lives off any psychiatric medications, SSRIs, prior to using the MDMA in therapy. Anxiolytics, sedatives and gabapentin were always continued, but ADHD medications were also ceased. Johns Hopkins, their studies have looked at psilocybin, the last one published in December of last year, and they ask patients to taper SSRIs for 5 half-lives and 4 months after the treatment as well. And Imperial College, their newest information is pending, and I think there's a talk about that in a few weeks. But again, 5 half-lives, no SSRI before the treatment. So we need something else to replace those medications, and my theory is that that's what cannabinoids will do. Having used them extensively in practice, I think they basically can do. And again, that's partially a lese majesté, because that's based on my understanding as opposed to vast amounts of statistical data that might back up my theories. So in summary, we need new ways of thinking, which we're all crafting. We all understand that non-ordinary states of consciousness are really the answers to many of these problems. We need new physiological targets to treat the effects of trauma, which are the psychedelic receptors, 5-HT2A and the endocannabinoid system. Through treating that endocannabinoid system, can we actually improve the treatment response to MDMA and psilocybin further than has been proven in the studies? And is regulation of the endocannabinoid system a foundation for assisted therapy? And I believe that it is. Yeah, gracias. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jamie. That was really informative, fantastic presentation. And we know that there's quite a few questions. Peter's got a question here as well, so I'm going to put him on. This is Peter Hunt, my husband.
G'day, Jamie.
Hello, how are you?
Well, good, thank you for that. That was fascinating. One thing that I was thinking about as you were talking through the use of cannabis is the complexity of the endocannabinoid system. And how you as a doctor, when you see a patient who's got whatever disease or problem he or she's coming in with, how do you think through the makeup of the cannabis that you give that particular patient?
It's a good question. So what I've really learned is that the cannabis is the tool. What we have to explain to patients, what I have to explain is what it looks like when the endocannabinoid system starts to work. And it looks like this. That's what it looks like. It drops people down. They feel better. Their pain goes away. Their anxiety decreases. They start sleeping, especially for mental health. We can talk about Parkinson's and MS, but I'm really starting to see that it's the dysregulation in our bodies, the dysregulation of our mind-body connection that's driving disease, whether that's fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, or anxiety. And by addressing the body, bringing the and the presence back, that's when people start to get better. So the cannabis, the cannabinoids, basically everyone gets CBD and THC, and they keep pushing the CBD up and using the THC until that happens. And then when that happens, we stop and we keep the dose at that level. So it's an individual understanding. It's not, this is the lese majeste. It's not a statistic. Here you go, one of those every day. See you in 3 weeks. Keep trying. Call me if it's not getting there. Have you got it? And then they come and say, I've got it, doc. It's happened. And you're like, right, sweet. Need anything else? No. Good. Great. Bye. It's fascinating. I had a patient, a lovely patient. She's 83, chronic pain. And she's a conductor of a church choir, fairly conservative lady. And her granddaughter convinced her to try cannabis, and she could have dragged her kicking and screaming. Anyway, she tried it. She came back after 6 weeks and she looked very upset. She came in and I thought, gosh, what have I done? What's happened? And she sat down. I said, you seem upset. And she said, I am. And I said, why? And she's 83. She said, they fucking lied to me, Jamie. And I said, yes, they did. And she said, I've been in pain for 25 years. And had I had access to these medicines, I would have spent a quarter of a century not in pain. And she was really angry. And this is a church choir conductor. You know, the story is over. It's collapsing in front of us. And we just need to get these, you know, these next medicines into society as well. And then, you know, there's a few plants, a couple of mushrooms that have basically got the answers that we need. And it's fascinating, isn't it? You guys know this. I'm preaching to the converted.
Thank you, Jamie. Now there's a truckload of questions here, and then we've got a couple more as well. I'm going to go through them quite fast so that we have got time to answer as many of them as possible, and as quick answers as you can. But I'm loving the presentation. This is from Elle, who says, in respect to depression and cannabis use, I've had conversations with GPs and a clinical psychologist recently who are not in favour of medicinal cannabis in general, who claim that cannabis is itself a depressant. Thoughts on this? Is there any evidence to support this claim or the contrary?
It's a good question. I get it every day of my life. Yeah, it depends what story you buy, doesn't it? If you're punching buckets in the bathroom, then you're probably going to get depressed. That's very true. Overloading our brains with THC with no other cannabinoids or CBD is not good. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about using highly refined medicines in a very controlled fashion to engage the endocannabinoid system. Now, there's lots of people out there stoned who don't have engaged endocannabinoid systems. It's not the same thing. And I don't think there's any way to get that message through until people start seeing the difference it makes. I'm up against it every day for all of these reasons. But many doctors see their patients get better and then they start referring more. And that's how we're going to do it, patient by patient, person by person. And we're going to slowly change the story. And we have a long way to go. And it might take 20 years, but I hope not. But, you know, this patriarchal mind, this collective trauma, it's so strong. And people are so entrenched in these ways of being and thinking that they can't see what's in front of them. So we just have to be patient and prove that it works, and that just happens slowly.
Well, congratulations on the work you're doing with that, Jamie. It's brilliant. This next question is, well, we need a lot more doctors like you, obviously. Thanks, very informative. Can you talk about why schizophrenia is different, as in why is this not recommended for schizophrenia at the moment anyway?
Because of psychosis. So there's a great belief and there's evidence that THC causes psychosis. So we don't give people who've had a psychotic episode THC. We give them CBD. CBD is a potent antipsychotic. I think a lot of this is the story that THC will fracture your mind and you'll end up, schizophrenic. I'm not sure how much of it is true. Now, I don't prescribe it for schizophrenics, and I won't until there's some studies to say otherwise. But I think this also ties into how we think about mental illness. What is schizophrenia? We're not going to be using psychedelics for people with schizophrenia and who've had psychotic. And in fact, if you've had a first-degree relative with a psychotic episode, you're disqualified from treatment. Is that true? Is that correct? Well, we don't know. But I think more of where this is coming from is speaking from the fear and the stigma and the story about what these medicines are doing. Because people who get schizophrenic, you're smoking THC grown by bikies, it's not the same thing. It's not what we're doing. So small amounts of THC, there's every chance we'll be fine, but there's no data to prove that, so we can't do it. But I think everything has to be approached from the perspective that the story is wrong and we can change it, and we just need to keep producing evidence, doing studies, working with people, and we'll get there. So I don't know if that answers your questions. It's out for schizophrenia, whether or not it needs to be. Same as psychedelic therapy, it's out for psychosis, whether it needs to be. That's what we're going to spend the next couple of decades looking into, I think.
Absolutely. And there are many researchers who are talking about research in those spaces, which is heartening to see. There's a question here from Alex. Do you believe the combination of psilocybin plus CBD could be similar to MDMA?
Good question. No, you tell me, Alex. Possibly, yeah. I mean, it's brain chemistry, isn't it? So I think it's really interesting how CBD is going to be used in this process, and I think it's all to come. You know, the talk that's coming in a couple of weeks about the somatic discharge from psychedelics and using cannabis to break down dissociation. Those guys are fascinating people, and they are flying well out on the fringe with what they're saying. But it's actually true, and they can prove it. But we haven't got the data, and we haven't done the trials. And the trials that have been done are to get us to legally use these medicines. That's about it. Non-directive medicine, safe, works. We haven't even started to explore how this is going to look, how adding CBD pre, during, or after might change it, how people might benefit from different medicines at different times. You know, this idea that the mystical experiences where the healing is, I think that's partially true, but there's many people who have a great result without mystical experience, and the somatic stuff's getting into that. So yeah, potentially we'll find out, I suppose, in the next few years, I hope. But yeah, theoretically it works too. Yeah.
So Jamie, actually, just another question from me there. It's all right, Peter, it's fixed. So SSRIs act as a blocker to the experience of a psychedelic-assisted therapy experience. And CBD and THC act as a gateway, or? Well,
that was the gateway, more being, you know, multiple, and there's so many references to that. The first one was that cannabis leads to harder drugs. It's bollocks. Let's move on. You know, a gateway, we're using it through the SASB. We're using it as an unregistered medicine. We're proving that this system works. We're going to access psychedelics hopefully through the SASB.
Well, no, I understand that gateway. I'm more talking about the physiological gateway. So do THC and CBD act as a gateway for psilocybin, for example, to work better?
Well, yes, but not directly. So my observation is that you know, when people have psychedelic experiences, difficult stuff's coming up. They have to sit through intense emotion. They have to re-experience things. They have to go through a very difficult process. It's very, very hard. Now, if you're hypervigilant, hyperactivated, and unable to sit with that emotion, then you're going to dissociate and you're not going to get anywhere with the psychedelics. So what I'm saying is that by bringing the regulation, by dropping people into the parasympathetic, starting to work through their trauma in therapy that they can access with CBD and THC because they're regulated, that creates the platform to then go in with the bigger medicines and actually do the work. You know, we can regulate the nervous system, and then we can rip out the reasons that the nervous system's dysregulated, and then we can send them packing, hopefully, by good life. You know, that's what we want. Okay. So there's multiple ways I think it will happen, but in that sense, it will prepare people by helping them regulate and homeostasis and present moment and being. And then, you know, Sarge and Steve will talk about using cannabis to break down dissociation so that the medicines work as well. So there's that kind of medical perspective of treating difficult symptoms so they settle. And then there's this other idea that it will actually create a whole new paradigm for how the medicines can work, which comes in a couple of weeks.
Okay, that's fascinating. This one here, those patients that have used SSRIs in the past with 36% efficiency, which was one of the graphs you showed, do you prescribe higher dosages in order to get that sigh of relief?
Well, you mean with cannabinoids? Do I prescribe higher dosages? I prescribe.
I assume so. Yes.
Yeah.
That's what it means.
I think so.
Yes.
I don't have a set way of looking at it. This idea of the analogy of getting the car out of the paddock and on the road with momentum, that might take 2 blokes, it might take 6, depends on how muddy it is and how bad the car is. CBD is the same. It might take 10 milligrams 3 times a day. It might take 60 milligrams 3 times a day. It might take 100 milligrams 3 times a day. There's no way to know. It's almost like saying, how much beer can you drink? I can drink 8, you can drink 4. Does it make any difference? No, not at all. It's you keep going until it happens, and then you've hit the point. And if you don't use enough, you can use 4 bottles at not enough, and it won't engage. It won't happen. So you've wasted 4 bottles. Go in with 1 bottle at big doses and use it all more quickly. Then the system engages, and then we work from there. Usually we can drop it down, but there's no set formula. That's why I love it. It's completely individual. I have to work with every single different person that comes through my office. Same as we will with psychedelics. It's completely individual. We have all these sort of papers being produced about why it's safe and working, but what goes on in each therapy session?
Yeah. I mean, this is really human-centered, patient-centered medicine, and that's
exactly
what's exciting about it.
And that's another reason it's a gateway, because endocannabinoid medicine is patient, human-centered medicine, as is psychedelic medicine. And that's not what's going on at the moment.
And that is the medicine of the future.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a question here from Candace, re therapeutic use. Do you have any focus on specific strains? Is there a certain level of CBD or THC?
No, to the second part. Strains, sort of. When we're using oils, so what makes a strain, what makes a cannabis plant what it is its combination of cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids, and that each individual mix is what makes a plant unique. The terpenes are the botanicals, how it smells, how it feels. THC, CBD, and then hundreds of other cannabinoids. So that's what makes a strain. Now, when you make oils, you lose a lot of that stuff through the extraction process. So you tend to not have as much. Strains are very important, I think, for flower. If people are going to use flower, then you're not going to give them a really strong sativa at 12 o'clock at night. It's not going to put them to sleep. They need an indica. So there's certain ways of working, different sativas, different indicas, different effects. But again, it's personal. So I can give someone an indica and say, use that to go to bed, and they come back 3 weeks later and say, well, it keeps me awake. And then the sativa settles them down. So you don't know. And I think strains is a bit Amsterdam, white Russian bubblegum. It's a bit, it's not
all the different kinds of truffles that you could have in Amsterdam. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, Jamie, I've got a stack more questions, so I'm going to ask them fast, and we're going to have to go a bit quicker with these answers, even though you're being so wonderfully comprehensive. So this is the speed dating part of this webinar. So from Cameron, a study I'll link below displayed that imbalanced gut microbiomes inhibit the production of a key lipid metabolite involved in signaling and homeostasis, that lipid metabolite being an endogenous cannabinoid. Are psychobiotics something that could be used to directly influence the ECS and get these messengers firing again?
Yes. So Ethan Rousseau does a lot of really interesting work around the gut biome and how that's dysregulating our endocannabinoid system, and how prebiotics and phytocannabinoids can balance everything out. And I think we talk about trauma a lot, but I think in the next few years, gut biome is going to have a massive impact on psychiatry, on pain management, and all sorts of stuff. And I think that's because of the endocannabinoid system. That's what you're referring to, and that research is coming. But I think I actually believe that the endocannabinoid system is a missing link, and I think that once we get that widely introduced into practice and understand it more, things are going to really change. And there's going to be quite a lot of people with egg on their face because they've been throwing rocks at us and they're wrong, and they're going to look stupid if they keep doing it because, you know, it's endocannabinoid system. That's what's going on.
Thank you. This next question from Michael, is THC addictive?
Question. No, it's not. Using THC to numb emotion and escape reality, that creates dependency. But THC is not addictive, much like it's not toxic. It's one of the least addictive substances around, really. But dependency, overuse, that, you know, that's a form of addiction, even though it's a kind of emotional addiction. And that, again, it's real. It happens. There's loads of people shooting holes in themselves with THC every day, and they're not using it as a medicine. There's loads of people shooting up heroin, but that doesn't stop us using morphine when someone's got appendicitis. You know, it's the same analogy, and it's just silly that people are still harping on about it because, you know, it just shows a real gross level of understanding of science, really, if you ask me.
Thank you. The next question, are the pharmaceutical companies on board with cannabinoids now similarly to SSRIs, or do we still have a way to go?
Yeah, this big pharma comes up a lot. Big pharma hasn't done much in the last 10 years. All their drugs are off patent. So I suspect they're looking at cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are hard because they can't be patented. I think big pharma is eyeing up psychedelics more than it's eyeing up cannabinoid medicine, to be honest. But yes, it's economics, right? More and more people are going to move into it, and they're going to want to make money out of it. The bonus for that is that more and more people will be using cannabinoids and psychedelics. So, you know, win-win. You know, all we can do is find the tools that raise our consciousness and let them do what they need to do. Yeah.
Okay. Next question is, I'm undiagnosed ADHD and ODD with a dash of OCD, awaiting formal diagnosis. The majority of ADHD people illegally use weed and combine alcohol as a coping mechanism. Once I'm formally diagnosed, I'm not keen on current pharma treatments of low dose speed and sleeping skills. For me, I've just got to go down. Just a moment, sorry, I just clicked past it. Here we are. For me, SSRIs made my behaviours much worse. That is, suicidal ideas, attempts, just wanting to know what are potential ways for me to move forward given the current situation regarding medications, legal or illegal, from #hypersittingduck.
Yeah, you've said a lot there, and you're in a tough spot. Currently, cannabinoids are available for legal prescription as a second-line treatment. That's where we're at. I'm not going to make any comments about that. I think what I've been saying, you know, speaks for itself already indirectly. They do work, interestingly, and I think it's fascinating that, you know, we give people with ADHD amphetamines. So we give people who are fast something to make them faster, and they slow down. And I think THC, I've noticed, is very similar. When you use THC in people with ADHD, you would think it's counterintuitive, but actually it can really start to bring them into the present and regulate without the side effects of amphetamines. And again, it doesn't work for everyone. So there's different causes of ADHD, and we need an endocannabinoid dysregulation or deficiency for these drugs to work, these cannabinoids to work. So if there's an element of that in the illness, then they'll serve you well. But unfortunately, you need to have speed before you can have cannabis.
There's one here, and there's so many more, so I might whiz through a few of these, but I think I'll just answer this one by saying, what if any other drugs shouldn't be used with cannabis? So obviously, when you prescribe CBD or THC or a combination of both, Jamie, you say what other medicines your patients shouldn't be taking with them?
There aren't any.
There aren't any, okay.
No. Just give them cannabinoids, wait till they get better, and then take all the other stuff away. Don't take the other stuff away until they're regulated and homeostatic. If you do it before that, it becomes a schmozzle. Once things are good and I'm in the present and I'm feeling better and I'm sleeping and I'm connecting to my partner and I'm enjoying myself, then we can take the other stuff away. And by then people understand how they work, so they can self-direct and they can titrate their CBD and THC as they need to, because they know how it's affecting them. So as you pull one out, go up a bit, get better, settle down, come down. But yeah, don't stop anything until it's working, because if it doesn't work, then you've created a pickle. So get it working and then change it.
From James here, great talk, thank you. The idea to titrate from SSRIs to cannabis before starting psychedelic therapy seems great. Would you recommend CBD oil on its own as a first line for someone who's highly anxious, severely depressed and diagnosed with complex PTSD, BPD, as opposed to a cannabis compound with THC, which could have a chance of increasing their mental health symptoms?
Yeah, THC is an unruly beast, and you have to be very careful with it. You know, but THC cops a lot of slack as well. You know, THC makes me paranoid, THC makes me anxious. What THC does is changes your default mode network and makes things that are unconscious, you know, they change. It's a non-ordinary state of consciousness in high doses. So I think that when people say THC makes me paranoid, I wonder if in a lot of the time it's not that it makes them paranoid, it's that they are paranoid. Much like people use psychedelics and they become very uncomfortable because what's in their unconscious gets put in front of them. Well, okay, I've got to deal with that. I think THC is working in a similar way. And I think as we explore it in psychotherapy as well, we will find it very useful. Listen to what Sarge and Steve have to say in the next talk, because it's the same stuff. It's not a first line treatment, sorry, you have to try the other stuff first. Hopefully that will change, I'm sure it will. Yeah, I think THC, if people have a relationship with cannabis and they understand how it affects them, it makes life a bit different. If they don't have a relationship with cannabis and they haven't used THC, then I'm cautious, and they are too. Some people it doesn't work at all, not many. Most people it can work, we just have to work at it. But it's the kind of, you know, it's the stimulator, it's dropping the clutch. It's quite an important part of the treatment, but you can use tiny amounts. Microdosing THC, that's what we do a lot.
Well, that makes sense. Hi Jamie, what do you mean by half-life?
Half-life is the amount of time it takes for a drug concentration to decrease by half. So if you've got 10 and it takes a week to get to 5, it will take a week to get to 2.5, and it will take another week to get to 1.25, and it will take another week after that to get to what's half of 1.25 point? My maths is gone. So the half-life is the amount of time. So for an SSRI, it's a week. Then you're 5 weeks off SSRIs, 5 half-lives. I think it's actually longer than that, but that's what it means.
Thank you for that. That's very valuable information. This one says 60 billion per year on mental health. Peter, you might like to answer this one. Equals, what is the majority of that money spent on, meds or therapy? You know that?
I've not seen.
I want to put your face in.
Sorry, I've not seen the precise breakdown on that, but you know, you can imagine that a lot of it's going to be on the primary care system, the hospitals behind that, the medicines that get used. It's going to be an aggregation of all of those things.
Thanks for that. And of course, you know, the Productivity Commission just said that the cost of mental health and suicide in Australia is now at 220 billion. Just in, I think that came out in November. There's a question here, what is the best CBD oil strain for trauma symptoms? I guess the patient needs to come and see you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, next question. I've reviewed studies that suggest CBD can be used for treating fungal infections, specifically Candida. What is your experience with this? Wouldn't
surprise me. Don't know though. Certainly it's not an indication currently through the SAS-B. I'm sure that topically it would work. CBD is magic stuff. There's no, don't know, probably, but not one day, hopefully.
I have long-term chronic insomnia and complex PTSD. Is cannabis legally allowed to be prescribed for this? I will be in Byron Bay region in the next month or two.
So cannabinoid medicine, cannabinoids are available to anyone who has a chronic health condition that's lasted for more than 3 months and has failed first-line treatments. So if you've had PTSD for 5 years and you've used SSRIs and you've used Valium to help you sleep and temazepam to help you sleep, and melatonin to help you sleep, then you qualify. If you haven't used any first-line medicines, then you don't qualify for medicinal cannabis currently in this country. It's a second-line treatment.
But hopefully in the future, you know, these medicines that we're talking about will all be first-line treatments.
I hope so. A lot sooner than I think it's going to, you know, I think it's going to take longer than we'd like it to, but yeah, that's the revolution that we need. Yeah.
There's a question here. I think what it means is, you know, how do you treat like comorbidities? For example, fibromyalgia plus chronic pain plus anxiety plus depression plus CPTSD.
I engage the endocannabinoid system and let that do the work for me.
Okay.
And that engagement, dosing it's about the person, not the condition.
Yeah.
You know, so when that system engages, it will treat those conditions. If 3 of them are due to endocannabinoid deficiency and 2 of them aren't, then only 3 of them are going to get better. But it's a shove, get that thing working, and then everything gets better from there.
Question here, Jamie, do you prescribe solely through the special access scheme?
Yes, I'm a registered medical practitioner, and medical cannabinoids are only available legally through the special access scheme or through authorized prescribers, where you don't have to do an application every time, but you're authorized by the TGA and an ethics body to prescribe these medicines.
Excellent.
For
I'll
conditions.
answer the next. Oh, thank you. Sorry. I'll answer this next one. When will we be able to legally take these plant medicines? So the more that all of us work together to talk about, share, educate, build awareness of the efficacy and safety of these medicines, the sooner they'll be legally available. So that's why we encourage you to, you know, psychedelics and also CBD will become much more available. And which is why we really encourage you to support our work and to share it with others as well. So, you know, on our next webinars, bring, you know, a couple more friends along, and you'll find that as people go up the learning curve and realise the healing that's available to them or their loved family members and friends, it really starts to become personal for every single one of us that these medicines become legally available as soon as possible, and that we do whatever it takes to make that happen.
And I think with that too, Tanya, you know, we look at the US, they're going to, you know, FDA, you know, prescribable treatments for PTSD, depression, substance abuse, anxiety. Oregon's legalized it. And there's also churches for people who want to use ayahuasca or peyote or other psychedelics. So the Americans are approaching society where it can be used medicinally. And also, if you're a member of a church and you use it for your own spiritual belief system, then you can access it through that as well. And I think we'd all like to live in that society in Australia.
Oh, absolutely. And it's great, isn't it, Jamie, to see, you know, Health Canada recently legalising the use of medicinal psilocybin to treat end-of-life stress and anxiety. You know, it just shows just how quickly the field is progressing. And we in Australia just need to get this information out there to as many people as we can.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just no, there's lots of people want to have an appointment with you, Jamie. We will recommend that they contact Psych Services. I know Alana's on the call at the moment, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Will there be an e-certificate issued after this informative webinar? I think we can, if you could send us an email about that, that is absolutely possible. There's one here. Hang on. Just a moment, sorry. The TGA is, okay, sorry. Oh, here's one from Suzanne who says, truffles are a good way to prepare unwind trauma. Why is CBD needed?
Well, good question. CBD is needed because it treats the endocannabinoid system. So truffles will help you down-regulate. You know, I assume you're meaning microdosing because, you know, you're not going to take a hero's dose of truffles every day after work, are you? That's not going to work. So microdosing, it's, you know, these are all the things we need research into, and these are all the changes that we hope to see. But CBD we are using to treat the endocannabinoid system. So if your stress and dysregulation is due to an endocannabinoid problem, CBD will help it. Truffles might make you feel better, but they're not going to treat the cause of your dysregulation if it's an endocannabinoid deficiency.
There's a question here from Alice. What area of ECS research effects of the various compounds cannabinoids do you believe is most needed?
Wowzers. All of it. Sharpish, please. Yeah, we just need the evidence. You know, this evidence-based system we work in that's what's needed. I find, you know, I gave you the evidence about SSRIs and they're still being prescribed. So there's a bit of hypocrisy there, but we won't make that point too strongly. We need evidence that these work, which they do. I can tell you they work. That's the lèse-majesté. I understand that they work. I need the scientific knowledge to make each person a statistic so that we can, not me, everyone will start prescribing it. You know, we need all the GPs and all the specialists to start using these compounds in people with endocannabinoid problems that are in their field of work. So if it's a neurologist, Parkinson's, MS, migraine, epilepsy. If it's a psychiatrist, depression, PTSD, anxiety. If it's a pediatrician, childhood epilepsy, kids and autism. You know, if it's a GP, it's all of it. You know, this system is ubiquitous. It affects everything. And you know, Gabor Mate, he talks about trauma being the driving force for all of our illness. And I wonder whether that trauma causes endocannabinoid dysregulation, and potentially that's the kind of physiology of how this is being perpetuated. So by starting to treat the endocannabinoid system, we can re-regulate, and then people can deal. That's what we're talking about. Deal with the trauma, deal with the dysregulation, deal with the unconscious.
Well, I think I'll make this now the last question. Do you have any knowledge? Okay, so I'll maybe also answer this one, Jamie, and you're welcome to please chime in as well, or opinion in the use of psychedelics in neurodegeneration. So actually what we're starting to see now is a number of trials globally that are starting to look at early stage dementia and Alzheimer's being treated by psilocybin-assisted therapy, which is extremely exciting. And it would seem to make sense when you look at those fMRI scans that if you have a psilocybin treatment, that you're going to have a far more connected brain, which is going to increase your neuroplasticity, which is going to be important for people who are having neurodegenerative diseases. Would you want to comment on that further, Jamie, as well?
Yeah. I honestly believe this is the future of medicine. It's plant-based. And I think it will evolve in ways we haven't even thought of yet. You know, I think that cannabinoids won't be extracted from plants. Something new will come. Psychedelics will change. The basic building blocks are nature's molecules. That's the point. Tryptamines, cannabinoids. Nature's given us the answers. And we need to apply modern science and medicine to that to keep evolving it from what is probably going to be considered fairly crude in 30 years' time. You know, it's coming. Much like in 30 years, if you drive a petrol car, you're not going to be very popular. You know, people used to bash electric cars and now they're faster than anything else. It's a new paradigm. And this is the same. If you're using SSRIs in 10 years, people are not going to be very happy about it. The replacement might be an analog of psilocybin. You look at a molecule of psilocybin, it's virtually the same as a molecule of serotonin. They're tryptamines. They look the same. Serotonin in here, mushroom, psilocybin. It doesn't take a stretch to realize that small doses of that psilocybin will treat depression if it's due to serotonin deficiency. You know, this is the way it's heading. The answers are there. Nature's given us the answers, and humans in our hubris decided we knew better, which we don't. Nature does.
Jamie, just a quick question here. If I was to start legal cannabis, how does it go with the current situation in New South Wales with the roadside saliva tests?
Can't drive. THC is the only prescription medication in Australia that is not permitted to be in your system when you drive. Full stop. You can have 6 dexamphetamine, 3 Oxycontin, 3 Valium and 4 beers, 2 beers and get in the car, but you can't have a microdose of THC currently. That's how it is.
Okay, Peter, you had a question?
Yeah, just a big picture question, Jeremy. You've obviously put a huge amount of time and effort into understanding the benefits of cannabis, or medicinal cannabis. For a typical GP who's been around for say 20 years, and he spent day after day seeing patients, how challenging is it for that GP to get their mind around all you need to know to be able to effectively prescribe in this field?
It's difficult. almost an impossible task, I would say, if you're going in from scratch. It's this is the thing. It's a new way of thinking. This idea of getting that's not how we work as doctors. That's not what we're trained to do. I did a lot of anesthetics when I was a junior doctor, and I learned a lot about pharmacology, and I learned a lot about observing the physiological response to drugs. I did my primary for anesthetics, and I learned a lot of pharmacology, and that's really helped me understand this. And then as I'm training as a psychotherapist, I'm understanding that is how we get better. So I've kind of been lucky in my career that it led me to this point. I think what we need to do is A, get it accepted, and B, we need to start teaching people. That's how medicine works. It's an apprenticeship. You show people how to do it. And I think doctors, especially once they've done their training, they're not, what's he going to teach me that I don't know? He's 30 years younger than me. This is kind of like, come on, guys, you don't just ask. There's loads of us that know what we're doing. There's a number of cannabinoid clinicians around Australia, and most of them are, really, really passionate about what they do. So we just need to, it needs to be accepted. And when people accept it, we are there to help them learn. That's what we want to do. Same with psychedelics. Once we understand, and then we want others to understand. And the more of us that do it and learn, the more others will learn from us. It's great.
Thank you. Ilan, we'll just work on the slides. Jamie, if you can just stick around, we'll probably have a final thank you in just a couple more minutes, so we can tell people about how they can book appointments with you. The question here from Suzanne, can the webinar be made available forward to people to whom it may be relevant? Absolutely. So this will be on our YouTube platform, and you can share the link with as many people as possible. So this is the psychological support service that we offer, which is managed by a wonderful psychologist, Dr. Alana Boy. And Jamie is one of the practitioners for psychological support services. So if you contact psychological support services and request that you would like to have an appointment with Jamie, I'm sure that will be possible. Correct, Jamie?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Next slide. Thank you, Ilan. So this is Tim Ferriss, who says, and he's one of the leading supporters, philanthropists in the area of psychedelic-assisted therapies. And he says that, investing in this field is going to have the biggest bang for buck in terms of healing millions of lives. There just aren't that many opportunities that are so dramatically obvious to help people and relieve suffering. And this is why my husband and I have donated a lot of money and, of course, all our time to bringing Mind Medicine Australia to where it is now, and to making sure that these medicines become available in Australia. So all the support that you can offer is gratefully appreciated. Next slide. Lots of people ask how they can help and spread the word. So start conversations and share this information. We have state and regional chapters. You can join ones in your own area or start one in your area if we don't have one there. We have a wonderful Learn section on our website. We need to talk to doctors and medical professionals, just as we have to heal patient by patient, we have to talk to doctor by doctor, as Jamie has, passionately spoken about, to make sure that, everyone can be up with the latest and that this can become a first-line treatment. As well as I've mentioned, you may want to fundraise through some of the events that you have, or your children's schools or others. We really rely on the generosity of a range of small and large supporters. We have a wonderful social media platforms, and you can follow us and share our posts on there. And of course, talking to local MPs is also very important. Attending lots of events, you'll learn a lot. We have people who come to every single webinar and have learned a lot. They say it's the best education, better than any course that they could have registered for. And of course, attend our summit. The next slide will be the summit, I believe. Ilan? Oh no, the certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapy. So this program, the CPAT program, has been developed so that doctors, psychologists, psychotherapists, social workers and others will be ready to treat patients around Australia with these medicines. So these medicines are already available through the SASB scheme on a case-by-case basis. And as people get trained through the psychedelic-assisted therapy certificate, there'll be more and more practitioners in Australia who will be able to facilitate sessions and help to get people well. So if you're a practitioner and you're on this webinar, we encourage you to register. The first intake is full, but the second intake has a few places remaining. That starts in July, and then we'll have intakes 3 and 4 in 2022. Next slide, thank you, Ilan. This is the summit. So this is taking place in November 2021 in Melbourne. As you can see, we have an incredible lineup of some of the leading scientists and researchers from around the world, and we really look forward to welcoming you to that. We already have sold nearly 300 tickets, so if you want to attend that, now's a really good time to register, because there's an early bird special and it's much cheaper than it will be in a couple of months. And there's also an introductory workshop for psychedelic therapies, a 2-day workshop. So we really encourage you to get onto the site and register as soon as you can. Next slide, thank you, Ilan. So the rescheduling, we're praying, fingers and toes crossed for that interim decision on the 3rd of February, and we'll keep you posted on that. And the next slide is the upcoming events. And so you can see here the webinar that Jamie was referring to on the 3rd of February, Radical New Somatic Approach. That date, unfortunately, Ilan, for the Gabor Mate is incorrect. It's on the 23rd of February is the Dr. Gabor Mate webinar. In fact, there's already over 900 people registered for that webinar as of today, with 6 weeks to go. So we recommend you get onto that as soon as you can and spread the word. So that's actually, Ilan, could you just confirm what date that is, please? Okay, I'm not sure that I can see Ilan. Nope. Okay, and then you can also see a very, very fascinating webinar on the 24th of March. And that's Dr. Robin Carhart-Harris, who'll be talking about the trial that's been taking place at Imperial College comparing the outcomes of psilocybin versus SSRIs. That should be an absolutely fascinating webinar, and we encourage you and everyone you know to join that as well. It is a world first, indeed. That's the first study of its kind. So Ilan, if you could take off the slides now, and we'll just open the gallery again. Thank you. Ilan, could you just confirm that date of the Dr. Gabor Mate webinar, please? Okay, I'm not quite sure where Ilan has gone. He is around in ghost format. Anyway, it's on our website.
Sorry, I'm here. So it's the 23rd of February.
Yep.
And then the next one is the 10th of March.
Okay, so it's just wrong on that slide, Ilan. So what's the one on the 10th of March then, Free?
So the 10th of March, so that's Peter Hunt, and that's Emerald Clinics.
Okay, and that's on clinical protocols for and also the sort of for-profit side of this field as well, which is also moving very fast. So that's for those of you who are interested in clinics, and also those of you who are, investors and interested in investing in this space as well. Because of course there does need to be a mix of for-profit and not-for-profit collaboration in this space to scale these treatments. So anyway, we want to just say thank you. There's a whole stack more messages. Let me just see. Ilan, have you put the psych services link in the chat so that people can contact Jamie?
I'll do that now.
Sorry, I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions. There is hope. There's lots of hope. We'll be very pleased to know. There's one here though, Jamie, as a university student studying psychology, I really feel this type of conversation is still so disappointingly missing from mainstream education in Australia. Beyond grateful to have been able to learn from you and broaden my understanding. There's an enormous amount of thank yous here, Jamie, and I will second all of those, and just say on behalf of My Medicine Australia, we're thrilled to be working with you. It was a very informative talk. We're very grateful for the work that you're doing in this space, and we just wish that you can inspire many, many more doctors to follow your lead, and look forward to doing lots more wonderful events with you. So thank you for being part of the MMA family and for your wonderful knowledge and wisdom this evening.
This is, I think it applies to you and Peter and Alana. There's this Japanese concept of our ikigai, our reason for being. And that's really why we're doing what we're doing, because, you know, this is why we're here.
Yeah.
It's essential that this happens.
Yes, it is. It is. And thank you to all of you who've tuned in tonight. We really appreciate your support, and we hope that you can spread the word and join our upcoming webinars and events and meeting you in any way. And just reach out if you need some connections or help or whatever. We love and support all of you, and this is going to be a good year, 2021, in this field. So there's something very strange happening. I'm really not sure what's happened. We had a sci-fi moment. Oops. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you. And if you can, bring along 1 or 2 more people to our next webinar, and we'll keep widening this until we reach a tipping point and it tips. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care. Good night.